So I want to tell you a little bit about my journey. So I titled this talk "My Wildlife Story from Special Education to PhD." My hope is to encourage you, give you some advice, and just kind of share my perspective. I'd like to start off with a land acknowledgement. I am speaking to you today from Missoula, Montana, the Northern Rockies, or the crown of the continent, and the Aboriginal territories of the Shalis and Kalpal people. I'd also like to recognize that other Indigenous people have also passed through and occupied and lived on this land as well. I like showing the photo that I have here because it really shows whose Indigenous land we're on. If you look at the arrow, you see a drainage on a hill. Well, that is a Native American camp on the bottom right photo. You can really tell that we are on Aboriginal territories of Indigenous people. Kind of going beyond that, though, what do these land acknowledgements mean? And I'm not going to tell you that I have, the correct answer. I will just give you my perspective. And for me, land acknowledgement should come with action. So for me, it's connecting with a tribal college that's just north of here, giving seminars or talks or training. It's incorporating traditional ecological knowledge into my teaching, giving a much more honest and holistic explanation and history of the conservation movement in the United States. It's working to pay my technicians a reasonable rate. It's reaching out and getting training on Native American mentoring and reaching out to Native American students. Part of it is also being comfortable with my own intersectionality. Additionally, what I've done is I've helped found the chapter of SACNA, Society of Chicano Native American Scientists. And kind of as I mentioned earlier, what I want to do is kind of share with you how education has changed my life, how mentorship has changed my life, how I've had many struggles, and I've had success along the way as well. And give you a perspective of an underrepresented person trying to make it in this field, specifically wildlife. Like it was mentioned, both my parents were born in Mexico, my father in Jalisco and my mom in Tamaulipas. They came to the United States for a better life. When I was a baby, my mom used to whisper in my ear, vas a ser doctor, vas a ser doctor, which is, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a doctor. Well, how did I end up getting interested in wildlife? I originally was born and raised for the first part of my childhood in California. I remember seeing National Geographic. Actually, I remember specifically seeing this video clip. I hope it won't be too loud, but I'm going to play it. It is these two brothers that were scientists that did research on grizzly bears. They were the first people to put radio collars on grizzly bears. They would, have to put them to sleep for a little while, and then release them with these collars. But they're kind of doing trial and error because they weren't sure how much medication to give them, and because of that, things like this video happen. You can see the bear is starting to wake up a little early, putting a clip so they can identify it. What they ended up doing was they found out that having these, they used to, in Yellowstone National Park, they used to have they let the bears eat the trash. And what they found out that it was really unhealthy, not good for the bears. It would also make them dangerous to humans. Um, and for a little while, they were a little controversial. Actually, the National Park Service didn't allow them to do research for some time at Yellowstone National Park. And the connection that I had it made was that one of these gentlemen, John Craighead, was actually a professor here at the University of Montana, where I'm a professor. I remember seeing this video and being like, wow, that is a career track. You can work with big, large, wild animals. And interestingly enough, I also wanted to work with amphibians in the Amazon. So I had like, great, let's work with grizzly bears and let's work with amphibians, not realizing that maybe those are two slightly different career tracks. But one of the themes in my life is that failure has been common. Uh, I actually think I know probably I grow more when I fail. I readjust my strategies. Something that, I share with my students is that success and failure lie in the same direction. And by that, I mean that, you will have failures along your journey or things that, you didn't quite meet the mark that you wanted to meet or whatever that goal. But giving up is in a different direction. As a matter of fact, if you've never failed at something, set your goals higher. I want to tell you about one of my most epic failures. I was a college freshman and I took pre-calculus or college level algebra and I failed it. And, that wasn't going to deter me. So I took it again and I failed it. So I decided that, well, what am I going to do? This is starting to get a little, challenging. If I can't make it, I actually decided to take a third time and I failed it. At this point, I was thinking, well, I mean, I can't even pass college algebra. How am I going to be a scientist? Luckily, I was able to reach out to a faculty member and find out that I could take high school level math classes in college. I had to pay a little extra for them. But I did that and worked my way all the way through calculus. Now we use math. I teach, I use equations in the work that I do and the classes that I teach. It made me realize it wasn't that I wasn't capable of doing the work. It's that I hadn't been prepared. And that I had to readjust my strategy. In that case, starting at a lower level and working my way back up. One of my students once asked me, Dr. Gomez, how'd you get so smart? And I remember thinking, well, if they knew the story about my failing my math classes, they wouldn't think that. What I told her is what I'll tell you is that you need, desire to achieve your dreams, desire in the face of perceived failure. I like holding on to rejection letters, either scholarship or job rejection letters as a way to motivate me, not a way to, never in a negative way, but a way to motivate me. But I told my student, I told her what she needed was what we say, at least amongst Mexicans, is gana, desire, inclination to achieve your goals. I grew up, even though I was born in the United States, I grew up speaking Spanish. At 11 years old, we moved from California to a ranch on the Oregon coast. And I remember Mrs. Lee's arts class. She asked everyone to read a sentence out of the book. And I was the only student that couldn't read. I literally, if it wasn't the word is, the, or a, I wasn't able to sound it out. I was diagnosed with some learning disabilities. I didn't want to get tested. I didn't want to know exactly what I had. It wasn't until I got my master's degree, my bachelor's degree, my master's degree, did my PhD research, did my PhD classes, and not till the end of my PhD did I decide to get diagnosed. I got diagnosed with dysgraphia and later on with ADHD. It's a badge of honor that I have now, but it's something that I used to be ashamed about. In college, I also had some struggles. I was working a little too much to pay the bill. I had a professor sit me down, Eric, do you remember the one in the orange shirt there, said, why are you here in college? What's your goal? And he didn't come from it from a place of anger or a place that he thought I didn't belong, but very much of a place of caring. There'll be people in your life, like my first actually academic advisor told me I wouldn't make it in graduate school, to other people that absolutely believed in me. Listen to the people that believe in you. Even if it's sometimes our own family that might be telling us that we can't do something, right? Especially if you make it to college, right? You're in college or you're community college, you're preparing, you are all capable of achieving your professional and career goals. So what did I do? I rethought my strategy. I wasn't getting good enough grades, and that's true. I wasn't going to be able to get into a graduate program, get a master's degree, if I continued on the same track that I was on. And so what I decided to do was I got a job working as a custodian for the university. I was actually cleaning up the gym from 4 to 8 in the morning. It was rough, but at 8 o'clock, the day was mine. That allowed me to go and volunteer a little bit in someone's lab. It allowed me to be involved in student clubs. It allowed me to have my weekends off so I could study or be involved with community events. I teach a class here at the University of Montana called Careers in Wildlife. And the whole goal of this class is to prepare students for a career. And the thing that I tell them, if they remember nothing else from my class, it's that they try to get experience. Whether if you're in college volunteering, in a lab, if you're in high school, maybe it's volunteering at a hunter check station if you're okay with dead animals. Maybe it's working at a boat check station to, stop the spread of invasive plants and mussels. Maybe it's doing a ride along with a local fish and wildlife or natural resource biologist. I've had students interview professionals. I have it as an assignment for one of my classes. They have to interview a professional in a job or career that they are interested in. I had one student that ended up interviewing a African lion biologist, and the student asked me, "Well, can I interview more people?" I'm like, "You can interview more people, and if you want to use my my class as an excuse to be able to interview more people just because you want to connect with them, that's fine." One thing that I encourage students to do is try to scaffold their career. And by that I mean is, kind of where you want to go. And so think about how you're going to get there. For most of my students, obviously it's wildlife. Maybe that means volunteering. For me, it meant a little bit of volunteering, but it meant, I applied to some jobs doing work in doing work with fish and streams. But I also applied to jobs that were a little bit easier to get, like that boat check station job or working as a recreation tech for Forest Service, where those jobs are a little bit easier to at least get your foot into the door. Me getting a job with the Forest Service as a recreation tech, which wasn't my dream job, but it was working in natural resources in the broader wildlife field. It led me to, interview for another job a year later, a summer later, where I worked for the Bureau of Land Management as a wildlife technician, where we did research on horned lizards. One thing that students might not be aware of, and I don't necessarily know if I was this aware of it, is that the title of your degree, and you probably do need a degree to pursue a career in this field, isn't very important. I'm a wildlife professor, and I've never had a wildlife. None of my degrees are in wildlife, if you heard earlier. Uh, my research is in that realm. The coursework is in that realm. My experiences are in that realm, but my degree title is not. So, the title of the degree isn't nearly as important as the classes that you take, the experiences that you cultivate. And again, I say you cultivate it because you're the one, you have agency. You're the one that has the ability to have a control your destiny, right? Luck is always a part of luck, but there's a lot to be said about people that create their own luck. Creating that luck is taking the coursework that's interesting to you, going on job board sites. I'll share later on, but looking at what jobs are available, what experiences, where do you want to be in 5 and 10 years, and in order to be there, what kind of courses, experience you be getting now or in college. Networking is important, right? And networking is a multiple stage thing. It's not a one-time event. It's often reaching out to that person a couple different times or over multiple years. And finding people that are willing to mentor you, willing to ask for, willing to give you advice. I'm a fan of collecting mentors, collecting people that are willing to help you out. Some people will have certain experiences that are really beneficial. Other people will have good experiences for different components of different parts of your career. So it's okay to have multiple people that you seek advice from. Like I said, college is important. You probably need, if you're interested in the wildlife field, you probably need a 4-year degree. You may even need a master's degree eventually. Again, the title doesn't matter. It could be in wildlife biology, it could be in ecology, biology, environmental science, conservation biology, or natural resource sciences. Well, I like sharing my failures because, again, people always think that success looks like this linear going up. When I was an undergraduate student finishing up my bachelor's degree and then through my master's degree, I applied to these big scholarships called fellowships, anyone ranging from, $30,000 to $100,000. And I got 6 different rejection letters until one day I got a call from one of the people that interviewed me for the fellowship, and I was awarded a $100,000 fellowship to continue on to my PhD. Now, the person to the left of me, who is now a friend of mine, Dennis Hayes, or to the right of me, excuse me, there in that photo, is Dennis Hayes, co-founder of Earth Day. I ended up eventually becoming chair of that fellowship committee and serving as a trustee for that board, and ended up helping mentor other students to get that fellowship before I ended up serving in a leadership role in their organization. One of my kind of little claims to fame is that I replaced Estelle Leopold on the board, who is a famed conservation biologist and scientist, member of the National Academy of Sciences, and also was the last living daughter of Aldo Leopold, the father of wildlife biology. I used my fellowship funds to do amphibian research. In graduate school, I found my calling. As I was finishing my PhD, I remember thinking, is working in science a good use of my skills and talents? I can spend a lot of time in front of a computer trying to figure out why amphibians are disappearing, what we can do to protect amphibians, or what we can, why are songbirds disappearing, what are the effects of climate change on that, what are the effects of contamination on birds, and all kinds of critters. What I found for me that I really enjoyed was teaching, mentoring, and empowering my community. I found my why, and it took years for me to actually get there. So don't be afraid or don't be too nervous if you're not exactly sure where you want to end up. That is okay. Actually, I generally encourage it because if you're a little bit open to the opportunities to present yourself, you're going to have more opportunities. We've been earlier in the day, they've been talking about different career paths, and so some of this is what you probably heard before, but you can work as a biologist or a manager, for a state agency here in Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, California. It used to be California Fish and Game. I think it's California Fish and Wildlife. Every state has their own natural resources or state fish and wildlife agency. They do most of the on the ground management with wildlife. Federal organizations like the Foresters and BLM manage the land. Sometimes state agencies also have lands that they manage. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will manage protected or threatened species, migratory birds, or threatened or endangered species. And then there's a whole realm, as you heard earlier today, on nonprofits advocacy, right? Either advocating for good science, advocating for conservation, advocating for different approaches in our management. There's private consulting organizations as well. So oftentimes there needs to be environmental assessments done when there's new development in the area, a highway, a hospital, a school. And private consultants are hired to examine what are the ecological impacts of that development. And sometimes the case, the development doesn't end up taking place because, it's going to cause too much harm. Sometimes they, the biologists there will work to see if they can reduce the negative impact. Plus, there's, a whole realm of different disciplines that you can go into, even if you get a science background. Folks I've seen go into the social sciences, right? Trying to understand the human dimensions component of wildlife and how people have different values and how that affects what we do with wildlife management. I've been in this field as a student or volunteer, as a professor, as a biologist for 25 years. And I go to the Texas A&M job board site somewhat regularly, mostly to find opportunities for my students. I'll have a link that I'll have more reasons at the end, but you're welcome to take a photo of that name if you want. It is probably the #1 natural resource job board page other than USA Jobs. It looks like we got some questions, but I'll save those for later. And someone asked, I can actually jump to this. You talk about scaffolding your career, but what is the best way to know what the right steps are? Just because it links to that job board thing I was talking about. Oh, thank you, David. Appreciate that. Put the link in the chat. The way you do it is it getting you working in that organization that you want to work in? I've a lot of students who want to work in Fish and Wildlife Agency. So they apply to, they apply to maybe working as a technician in the Fish and Wildlife Agency job. But they also apply to some students working in an office job, just to get them in that direction of working in that organization. Think of things that are just kind of pushing you toward that direction. The other thing you can do is, go reach out to local people that have the jobs that you're interested in and ask them. That's kind of one of the reasons I encourage the ride along and interviewing professionals. Now I kind of want to share a little bit, and I'll leave time for some Q&A, but the opportunities that I've had because of science and education, and maybe give you a glimpse at some of the things that you might be able to do if you decide to go on, go this route. I've been able to present my research at the National Science Foundation. I've lobbied members of Congress for more science funding. Not sure what's going on with my hair there in that left photo. I've been able to work on monarch butterflies. as an undergraduate student, I applied to a small grant to be able to do research on crayfish. And it wasn't because I was like super interested and super excited about crayfish, but because it was an ecological question I could answer, specifically what was the distribution of this non-native species compared to this native species of crayfish in a local drainage, a local creek. I got an opportunity to do these talks and talk about, having a career in wildlife. I've worked with amphibians and reptiles in central and eastern Washington. I've recently started doing some work on painted turtles and continuing that work here in western Montana. I've done research on streams and lakes in the Pacific Northwest, looking at trout and salmon populations. I achieved a childhood dream of going to South America, specifically Ecuador, and studying amphibians, a fungal disease that's specifically a fungal disease that's killing amphibians across the world. And luckily, we'd found in some sites, but most of the sites that didn't have this fungal infection, which is really good. And this opportunity came because there was a scientist I wanted to work with. I connected with him at a conference, connected with him again. I don't think he remembered me the second time, but the third time he remembered me, and he invited me to join him on this research expedition in Ecuador. And some photos from the work that we were doing. I was able to recently, since I've been here at the University of Montana, go to Jalisco, Mexico, my father's home state, where I helped out with some turtle research, and I did some actually cane toad research. Those are cane toads. They're invasive species in many parts of the world, the Caribbean, Hawaii, Australia, but they're native in continental Latin America. And so these are individuals that are actually native, and you can see that they are big and puffed up and mad that I'm holding them. I've used my position as a scientist to advocate for climate justice and social justice issues, and even got to work with endangered horned lizards in southeastern California, where my car broke down, a truck broke down one day, right along the US-Mexican border. And that same border in that same area that my father had crossed 35 years earlier. To think about, he probably saw a sign like this: don't expose your life to the elements. It's not worth it. Well, remember, I started today's chat talking about wanting to work on grizzly bears. Well, when I was in graduate school at Washington State University, we had a grizzly bear research facility. While I didn't do grizzly bear research there, I did use live grizzly bears as a backdrop to do environmental education events. Since then, I've had an undergraduate student here at the University of Montana do a population study on grizzly bears using camera trap data, where the state agency here had put up a bunch of camera traps, and we're trying to identify individuals from those photos to do a rough estimate of how many females that we had in that population. But along the way, I ended up getting interested in working with smaller critters. People, think University of Montana, home of Glacier National Park, home of near and adjacent to Yellowstone National Park. I get a joy actually of working with the little critters that don't get as much attention. There isn't a standard definition of what charismatic mini-fauna is, but this is our definition. It's usually animals that aren't harvested, so you're not hunting them, collecting them, fishing them. It includes vertebrates like mammals and songbirds to invertebrates like crayfish and butterflies. Often it's wildlife that doesn't get the same attention. Most wildlife research and conservation goes to mammals and birds and salmon here in the United States. Usually charismatic animals, usually animals that are harvested. So I like working with the critters that don't get as much attention as those big little critters. That's not to say we don't do, we don't work with grizzly bears or we don't work with other species, but we have a bigger focus on the smaller critters. Well, what happened to that story of, my mom telling me to be a doctor in Spanish? Well, I became a doctor, just not the doctor that she wanted me to become. And there's this quote by a professor that resonates with me, and I hope it resonates with you. It's that there will be brick walls there that stop people that don't want it badly enough. They're there to stop other people. And I'll add, they're not there to stop you. I get a real big joy and passion out of, working with students. I got into this field because I liked working with critters. I liked working with wildlife. But what kept me in this field is actually mentoring, teaching, and being able to educate and empower the next generation of biologists. For those that are interested in wildlife, I would encourage you're welcome to follow me on Instagram, but also there is a free guide that a friend of mine, Gail Sanchez, wrote about how to become a wildlife biologist. So you can use that QR code to find it. Hopefully we can leave that up for a few minutes so folks want to access that. I can also put it up in the chat here in a little bit if needed. Yeah. And it looks like we have some questions. So yeah, one thing that always frustrates me, well, first question I see here, one thing that always frustrates me is, years of experience and when I was playing, they were recently a recent graduate. I'll give you an example. So this was said in the previous session, but sometimes students or young professionals aren't always as good at selling the skills that they have. I had a student who said, I wouldn't qualify for a wildlife technician position because I've just worked as a CNA, a caretaker at a adult assisted living home. And they work from the swing shift, I think. So like midnight to 8 or 10 to 6 a.m. And I said, oh, so in that job, were you always supervised? No. Okay, so you had to work independently. Good. You should say that in your application. Did you have to do note keeping or record keeping of medicines that you were giving your patients and cataloging all that work? And the student said, yeah. And I'm like, what was there stressful environments? Did you have to work in emergency situations occasionally? Yeah, absolutely. Did they always have a supervisor on site? No. Sometimes at 20 years old, there was no supervisor on site. All those skills are useful skills that absolutely translate to, getting a job in this field. Record keeping, working under stress, working independently, being responsible, supervising other people. So a little bit is, trying to think creatively of what are your transferable skills and experiences that you can use to sell for that position, right? And again, the thing that I always do is, just scaffolding your career where you're working adjacent, maybe not exactly in what you want to be doing, but you're working with that organization to get your foot in the door. And then the other thing that might be uncomfortable, I know it's a little uncomfortable for me, and I still do this, is I share with people around me of what my goals are. It's always a little nerve-wracking because once you put those goals out there, sometimes you feel a little bit more pressure to achieve them. But people can't help you achieve your goals if they don't know what your goals are. And so for me, it's often it's sharing my goals with people so they know that when opportunities come or they see an opportunity that's right for me, they'll reach out to me or they'll share that opportunity with me. We definitely have time for more questions.
Yes, Dr. Gomez, and I also have a couple questions that have come in from the staff as well that I'll pose to you. But before I do, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your story. I love when keynote speakers, panelists come in and aren't afraid to talk about the times that they failed, aren't afraid to talk about the times that things didn't go as planned. And many times the things that they've learned, the opportunities that they would have overlooked. There's often another side to that story that really calls into the question of is this truly failure? Your mention of
Yeah,
holding on to all of the rejection
like I
letters
say,
remind.
I call them perceived failures, right? They're perceived because you didn't meet the goal. Uh, one of my biggest failures that I guess I didn't even put in there. I guess because it was somewhat recent, last 4 years, which for me is recent. I remember 4 years ago was a lifetime ago. Well, I was finishing up my PhD. I'd applied to this job that I really wanted, and COVID happened, and the job got pulled after I interviewed, and it was a 10-hour interview. Well, because of that, I ended up applying to a bunch of jobs everywhere. And I got a job here at the University of Montana, which, is one of the highly rated wildlife programs in North America and a prominent one of the oldest wildlife programs. If you would have told me, the 6 months, 9 months before when I got that after interviewing that the job had been canceled, that felt like a failure to me. But it ended up having a super beneficial part of my career. I can't imagine having the opportunity to work with grizzly bears at other places, or doing this, working with songbirds, or having graduate students. The opportunities I get here are so astonishing. Honestly, things sometimes just kind of fall on my lap. But that happened because I didn't get the job I really wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important to keep those memories that they're so easy to forget and move on to the next perceived failure. We have a couple questions on mentorship. So one coming from an attendee who says, I share your passion on mentoring youth and want to build an organization that makes this possible for minorities here in the US. What is the best advice you can give to them on starting something like that? That's the hardest part that they've found.
I mean, I think, if I was, this is me thinking on the spot here, but it would be cool to pair people up with professionals across the country. We live in the Zoom digital world, right? Where you don't have to be in person to learn from someone else. It would be cool to do a network, a social media network of some kind, where you advertise for mentees and mentors, right? Well, part of what I try to do on Instagram is share the work that I do, and also, like share opportunities for students. I've gotten so many opportunities because of Instagram. I'm working on a book chapter right now, through John Hopkins Press, and that came through a friendship that I made through Instagram. And so in this collaboration that ended up happening, eventually we met in person at a conference, but our friendship started because of social media. And so my advice would be think about how you can use social media, think how you can use the digital age to connect people across the world, or, to students, across the United States.
And I would be remiss if I were not to use this opportunity. Now, this is a region-specific opportunity, but I'm going to share it in the chat. one of the coalitions that the National Wildlife Federation is a part of. It's called Choose Clean Water Coalition. They do operate a young professionals of color mentorship program that works very much as you described, Dr. Gomez, in terms of kind of interviewing potential mentors, interviewing potential mentees, and then providing an opportunity to kind of match them up. So it's a great
That's
model. It's
great.
one that, yeah, definitely. Oh, and looks like uh, there's a mention by Eugenie Lewis of forming a youth network in Los Angeles with a focus on climate career opportunities with the Climate Reality Project. So that's another great kind of point is linking up with organizations and networks that are doing this work. Um, one question I kind of want to have one more question on the mentorship angle, and that is, in particular, when you're working with students of yours, how do you encourage them to find or identify mentors? I know that sometimes you have someone kind of filling a mentorship role kind of organically. How do you provide guidance to encourage them to kind of formalize that or to kind of initiate a conversation with that mentor about having an ongoing guidance types relationship?
So I'll tell you what I did when I was looking. I knocked on doors and engaged with the people that were receptive. And I was an undergraduate, I was applying to a certain advisor and I decided to switch advisors. I kind of just did that on my own. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't even know you had to ask for permission. You did. I didn't even know, right? I just went and did it. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have this person serve as my advisor. Then they assigned me this, since they found out they assigned me a new advisor. I just kept on showing up to that mentor's door. Um, it- but there was sometimes I show up and no one would answer, and no one was ever there, right? A little bit it's kind of reading the room and and being willing to be mentored by the people you want to be, that want to mentor you. I originally wanted to work with mammals like a lot of people in wildlife, but the person who opened their door to me was an aquatic ecologist, Dr. Michael Parker. And it led me to a career and getting a PhD on working with amphibians. Um, and so part of it for me was also just being open to that. Knocking on doors, being receptive when people are receptive to giving you advice. I think, in college, I think, professors were pulled in many different directions. But many of us, most of us, I think, really want to share, our knowledge, share the advice that we have with people. And think of that, don't think of just one mentor, think of a collection of mentors. Different mentors serve different purposes, right?
Mhm.
And so don't think of just that one mentor. The other thing I'd encourage you to do is keep in contact with your mentor. What I did for a while, before social media, is I would literally send out a newsletter once a year of what I was up to, as a way to thank them for helping me out. And one of the things that I would tell them is that I can't pay you back, but what I will try to do is pay it forward. And sometimes it's been paying it forward directly to their current student by mentoring and giving them advice to their current students they have at a different institution. Sometimes it's paying it back by, obviously working with the students that I have here. Realize that not everyone's going to have the bandwidth or the ability to mentor you. But you go, if you knock on enough doors, you'll find someone that will give you advice.
I like the advice to have a collection of mentors, a Justice League sort of mentality where you go to different folks for different things. I know that I had a mentor. I used to be an engineer, and I had a mentor who was a more senior engineer who could give me advice on, professional development within that sector. But I also had a mentor who had nothing to do with engineering, but was really good at reinforcing the need to maintain a good work-life balance, avoid burnout, and could kind of get into like more of the emotional needs of a professional career path. We have two questions here that are kind of similar with regard to switching switching sectors or switching focuses. So one
Oh
is
yeah.
could a zoologist work on conservation as well, and the other is someone who graduated recently with a degree in environmental engineering but is interested in wildlife work and feels a little bit overqualified because they have the degree, but underqualified because it's not the degree and the work that they're really trying to pursue at this moment. What advice
Yeah,
would you
so
give to
the
those?
first the zoologist is, I mean, essentially it's a zoology degree is an organismal biology degree. So you know, that you'd probably in a lot of ways have been better set up for a career in wildlife than I was. My degree was in environmental studies, where you know, I took a decent amount of coursework in biology. So I would say you're, you know, the person that asked if zoology can work in this field. Absolutely. Zoology is organismal biology, not the study of working in zoos, which sometimes students think. For environmental engineering, the wildlife field is becoming much more quantitative. Um, and environmental engineers typically have pretty good quantitative understanding. They typically have pretty good computer skills as well. They tend to have, at least if they don't have coding skills, they're usually the type of person that can learn good coding skills. And so, you know, in that example, you know, I would still think about applying to technician positions as long as you can, you know, share your transferable skills, right? Can you do the work, the physical manual work that's a part of that? Consider, you know, you can still take college classes, right? When you're once you've already graduated, maybe that's taking not computer science, that's taking a GIS class, Geographic Information Systems class, at a community college or at night, or learning it on your own. I, as a professor, still do trainings. I don't take like straight up official classes anymore, but I still take trainings to learn what's the new coding method, what is the new what's the new technique that people are using that I want to learn and that I want to apply. I think, you know, for that environmental engineer, I'd also, you know, ask you to consider thinking about, you know, going on and getting a master's degree. I think that you know, I would absolutely consider bringing on a graduate student with an environmental engineering degree for a master's degree, especially if we're doing something like you know, something related to technology. I know environmental engineering is a little bit different than you know, mechanical engineering, but there's some transferable skill sets there. Um, you know, a lot of fisheries biologists do a lot of environmental engineering, hydrology. You know, I've known people with environmental engineering that go into hydrology, so the study of aquatic systems, the physics and geology of aquatic systems. I would say that having an environmental engineering degree wouldn't hamper you at all. Probably would want to go and get maybe go and get a master's degree. The good thing about a master's degree in this field is what I generally would ask students to do and think about is getting a funded graduate degree, right? So if you're producing a thesis, if you're producing a product of some kind of published paper, typically those programs are funded. I did not pay for my master's degree. Um, I taught and I had my professor had research funding and that paid my school and even gave me a little bit of spending money. I wasn't rich, that but you know, it was enough to live on and definitely a lot more money than I made as an undergrad student.
Yeah, absolutely. All great advice. As a environmental engineer in the past myself, I also took advantage of took advantage of a program by my employer at the time to pay for a master's degree. So agree, if you can find an opportunity for a project or a company that pays for a master's degree, that's one way to go about it. And in addition, some of the kind of echoing the geographic information systems and also wildlife crossings is a big focus right now, connecting natural areas so that migrating animals have ways to do so safely. And major engineering firms, environmental engineering firms, are some of the top places to go. So there are definitely a number of pathways ahead of you. I think we have
And
time for maybe one or two more questions.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so this one came in and says, what is the benefit of joining your local environmental commission board? Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, so this is something I think of. I haven't joined a governmental organization, but I have joined different environmental organizations like the Bullet Foundation, where we gave out about $5 million worth of grants a year, and now I'm on an environmental think tank. Um, I'm going to let you in on a sad secret about being a scientist. I work in the applied realm, and so my work is supposed to influence management decisions. But I suspect, and I get the feeling, I don't have this quantified, that much of the science that scientists produce, even us in the applied realm, doesn't get used. Part of it is because science is only part of the equation of how we make these decisions. Plus, science isn't an ethic. It doesn't tell us what to do. It predicts outcomes. Um, and so for me, being involved in organizations like you mentioned, it allows me to have a broader impact beyond my science, but it still allows me to rely on my technological expertise or my knowledge. I've straight up used population ecology to look at budget sheets. I mean, the math is the same, right? You have the principal, you have starting population, you have so much interest or spending, the math is identical. And so I've absolutely used my population ecology knowledge, as a board member. I think the benefit of joining those is you learn who the movers and shakers are in your community. It's great networking opportunity, and it's a way to have a broader impact outside of whatever job that you're doing.
Do you have a list of resources for fellowships? And I'll also follow up that we have a virtual career center at the National Wildlife Federation called EcoLeaders. It's on our EcoLeaders website. I apologize if my dog's making a lot of noise,
Oh,
just
I don't
ready to
hear
play fetch. Do you have any resources that
the one that I tend to direct students to, because it's kind of in my field, is the NSF, National Science Foundation Graduate Fellowship. It's labeled GFRP. I've seen students, typically you think of the 4.0 students that get that. I mentored a student that had 3.2, just like me. That's what I graduated undergraduate with. My first 4 point wasn't until graduate school. Another thing I'll share. But that's a that's a good opportunity for students. It can take a couple of tries to get it, but it funds 3 years of master's or PhD. Even if you don't get it, it allows you when you're applying and reaching out to faculty that you want to work with. Let them know that you applied. It kind of just, for me, when I see that, I said, okay, the student knows the game. The reality is that we need funding to do the work that we do, right? We live in a capitalistic system. People need to pay their bills, keep the lights on, right? And when a student shows me that, oh, they're thinking about their own funding and not just relying on me as a professor to do it for them, that shows a lot of initiative, when students are doing that. I have a current student that ended up getting her own fellowship. We had funding for her, and it just made the project much better because now you didn't have to use all that funding for the wages. We could use it for some of the work that we had to do. And so it was a great leveraging opportunity. Someone asked if I have any grad opportunities right now. I have a relatively small graduate lab, big graduate lab, big undergraduate lab. Part of that was because I really leaned into the teaching part of my career. I love teaching. I like the immediate gratification of teaching. But when I do have a job, a position available, I will post it on my Instagram, and like every other wildlife faculty I know, I'll post it on the Texas A&M job board site. All my faculty, all my colleagues here at the University of Montana, I think post their position, at least us in the applied realm, those that are asking usually questions that are funded by a state or federal agency to answer an applied question.
Excellent. I was hoping you would see that one. You've got people trying to work for you. So
Hey,
excellent.
that, yes, I wish there was more of me, but that's why they need to come up, and make more of us.
That's right. Excellent. So, Dr. Gomez, we're just about out of time here, and I just want to thank you for bringing us home, for helping us finish off this EcoCareers Summit with, again, fantastic advice, inspirational stories, and resources and ideas for folks, regardless of where they're at in their on their path, whether they're still in school, in high school, in college, working a trade, working a professional job. There's ways for all of us to make a difference for conservation, for habitat and wildlife conservation. So thank you. Thanks.
I want the
Go ahead.
field to look like the United States, right? Whether that's
Yes,
socioeconomic, I want it, whether that's cultural, religious diversity, whether it's gender identity. I want our conservation field to represent the beautiful diversity that we have in these beautiful United States.
absolutely. Thank you so much. And just a quick note for everyone, I'm going to encourage folks to check out the lobby. A lot of folks have been sharing their LinkedIn profile, so a great way to connect, learn about other opportunities. That'll be up through the end of the month, so plenty of time to go there. You can also go there to watch the recordings if you were able to tune in for this session, but not able to tune in earlier. You can check out the earlier sessions. They're already, Zoom is automatically adding them to the lobby. And then there's also a pinned note for a career planning workbook that we at the National Wildlife Federation have put together. Kind of walks you through the process of envisioning, creating that scaffolding. We use different terminology, but essentially creating that scaffolding for your career plan. So encourage you all to check that out and expand your network and get involved. Thank you again, Dr. Gomez, and thank you to you all for participating this year.
Gracias. Cuídense. Take care.
Take care, everyone.